So this is part 4 of your KIN 225 lecture for Wednesday, February 10th. So to carry over from the previous part, I wanted to give examples of some plyometric exercises. So using that stretch reflex to enhance your power performance. So in this case, the person's doing what are called box jumps. So they're jumping from one height to another, and in between they're landing on the ground. So the key when they're doing this exercise is that they want to take off as soon as they land. They don't want to have too much of a pause between the landing and the takeoff. So the way the stretch reflex works here is when they're landing, they're getting a rapid stretch of their leg muscles when they land. So it's like an eccentric contraction. When you're landing, you're forcefully stretching the leg muscles. That would activate the stretch reflex in your leg muscles, especially your quadriceps, and with regards to your hamstrings, to allow you to do your hip movement. And then that sends activation to the spinal cord to enhance contraction of the muscles on the takeoff. So you can actually jump higher if you have that initial landing. So that's how you train for vertical jump performance using plyometrics. Now the next example I have here is an upper body plyometric exercise. So in this case, the person's doing what are called clap push-ups. So they're pushing up off the ground, they're clapping their hand in the air, and then they're landing and then doing another push-up. So it's like a plyometrics for the upper body, for the triceps and the chest. So when they're landing from the clap push-up onto the mat, they are inducing a rapid stretch in their triceps and their chest muscles. The muscle spindle in those muscles would send excitation to the spinal cord to enhance the contraction on the subsequent push-up. So in this case, the person is doing quite a crazy maneuver here. It's not only just a clap push-up, but it's a triple clap push-up. So you'll notice they're pushing up, they're clapping in front of them, then behind them, then in front of them again before landing. So again, when they're landing, they're forcefully stretching their triceps and their chest muscles. That activates the muscle spindle, sends excitation back to the spinal cord, to the motor neuron that innervates those muscles, and allows them to get a better push-up. So it enhances their muscle contraction. And this is just an example of a plyometric exercise. In this case is used by tennis players. So they're throwing this medicine ball back and forth. You'll see that before they throw, when they're catching the medicine ball, it's inducing a stretch in their muscles, so an eccentric contraction. And then when they're throwing the medicine ball, that's the concentric portion of the contraction, and that's enhanced by the previous stretch. So in this case, they're using plyometric contractions by throwing a medicine ball back and forth. So let's get these guys going here. First thing they're doing is just tossing the ball back and forth. So when they're catching the ball, that's the eccentric contraction. That's when they're stretching their throwing muscles. And then when they're throwing the ball, that's the concentric contraction that's enhanced by that previous eccentric contraction. So they're getting a rapid stretch of the muscle when they catch the ball. And then when they're throwing it, that throwing force is enhanced. And so this is just to build up power in their upper body. And since they're tennis players, they're doing this side-to-side type of motion to help them with their tennis swing. their racket swing. So again, they're getting a stretch of the muscle when they're catching the ball, and then when they're throwing the ball right after that, that throwing motion is enhanced by the previous stretch with the activation of the muscle spindle. The last thing I have to show you here is just applying, activating the muscle spindle during a weightlifting maneuver. So this is a deadlift, and with the deadlift, with the different repetitions, instead of pausing at the bottom of the lift, what this person is going to be doing is they're going to be bouncing at the bottom of the lift, and that improves the subsequent lift. They're bouncing at the bottom of the lift to activate the stretch reflex, and that improves their lifting performance. So you can see she's bouncing at the bottom. And now she's doing a typical deadlift without that bounce. So in this second part, she's not really activating that stretch reflex at the bottom. So with the bounce, she's activating the stretch reflex, and that's helping her to lift the barbell. And then again, the second part, she's coming to a dead stop here, and that prevents activation of that stretch reflex. So if you want to cheat when you're lifting a weight in a competition, you can just bounce at the bottom of your lifts, and that activates that stretch reflex, and will help you with your lifting performance. The last thing I want to go over here is applying the muscle spindle, again to power performance, but also to stretching. True or false, long durations of static stretching can impair subsequent strength or power performance. The answer here is true. So with long periods of static stretching, recall that the purpose of static stretching is to fatigue the muscle spindle. But if you're fatiguing the muscle spindle, then you can't use that muscle spindle to help with your stretch shortening cycle or your plyometrics in your power performance. So the general recommendation now is, if you're doing any sport that involves a lot of power, is not to do long durations of stretching before you do your performance. So this is just the first study that really looked at this. They looked at really long stretching of the plantar flexors. They stretched the plantar flexors for like half an hour, and then they found that it impaired activation of that muscle spindle when they wanted to generate power afterwards. So now this plays into warm-up recommendations. So for a while, coaches and trainers were recommending not to do any static stretching before a performance, with the theory that the static stretching would inhibit the muscle spindle and inhibit subsequent power performance. So the recommendation here is don't perform a high amount of static stretching immediately before strength or power performance. But on the other hand, static stretching may be beneficial for injury prevention. So now the recommendation is kind of switched to moderate static stretching, so 20 to 30 seconds per muscle group, and that will not impair your power performance if there's an adequate break, so say 5 minutes before your stretching and your performance. Or another strategy is to do your static stretching first, and then do some dynamic type of warm-up after your static stretching, but before your performance, and that will prevent that fatigue of the muscle spindle, so that you can still use your muscle spindle in your plyometrics part of your muscle performance and use that stretch reflex to help with your power performance.